Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sports Speak. Happy Friday. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
A lot to delve into. NBA play-in tournament just about to wrap up tonight, and there's been some action already, including a great matchup between LeBron James and Steph Curry. We'll get to that, as well as the MLB now almost 2 months into the season. But there's two main storylines right now: no hitters and injuries. Of course, me and Tim, Mets and Yankees fans, know a lot about that. We'll delve into that. And then lastly, NASCAR for the first time racing at COTA, Circuit of the Americas, all three series. There's actually practice and qualifying going on. So we'll preview all the action in NASCAR as well. But I'm going to start things off, Tim, with a little SEC. We haven't done one of these in a couple of weeks. I'm going to say that my surprise is just how many injuries there have been in baseball. I'm not necessarily surprised that there has been an uptick because thinking about it, 162 game season. By this point in last season, most of these teams are up to almost 60 games played this year. They've played almost as much as they did in the entire 2020 season. So, I sort of understand that, but the extreme number of injuries, and it's especially with the Mets and the Yankees. Now, first of all, I just don't understand why these two teams seem to get more injuries in bunches and more significant injuries, it seems like, than any other team. And it feels like it's been that trend for the last 5 years. But the Yankees, of course, losing a bunch of outfielders. Giancarlo Stanton with his obligatory trip to the injured list every season. Of course, they were without Luke Voit at the beginning of the season, still without Luis Severino. And then the Mets, 7 of the 9 that were in the opening day lineup are currently on the injured list. Jacob deGrom should be fine, though. He was throwing 102 last night against single-A hitters, and they said he should be back on Tuesday. And J.D. Davis is supposed to be just a couple days away from a return, but still, they're without Nimmo, Conforto, McNeil. Pete Alonso just landed on the injured list today. Of course, Kevin Pillar, after that scary injury, he's out. Albert Almora Jr., Luis Guillorme, and plus J.D. Davis. Those are 8 of their 13 original position players from opening day. It's staggering, and I'm surprised just how many injuries there has been. Now, my expectation will shift gears to the NBA. I'm not surprised that the Lakers took care of business against Golden State. Even if they were a little banged up, they're a better team than the Warriors. Steph Curry is having a great year, MVP caliber year, definitely deserving of being a finalist. But that being said, the Warriors roster does not bring much to the table. They're without James Wiseman right now. Draymond Green has not had that good of a year, and basically all of his statistics, especially his scoring, have really gone down these last couple of years. And other than that, there's really not much to talk about. Andrew Wiggins is solid, but Golden State is not a deep team. The Lakers improved on their depth, brought in Dennis Schroeder, Montrezl Harrell, Marc Gasol, all in the offseason, and Andre Drummond, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, all healthy enough to get the job done. And I'm going to be interested to see what they can do, but not surprised there. And in conclusion, I like the play-in tournament. I know LeBron James, well, he was a proponent of it last year, and then all of a sudden this year, he's saying that whoever came up with the idea should be fired, I guess because the Lakers were in it. But regardless, I mean, I like this excitement. It keeps more teams involved. It's these little one-game playoffs. Sometimes these NBA series, especially having 7-game series in the first round, can kind of make the playoffs drag a little bit. I kind of like this little elimination style, these one-game matchups, just like we see in March Madness. And you see how people rally to watching March Madness if they want to see basketball at high stakes. And some of these NBA series where it's like game 2 of the first round, nobody really wants to watch that. But if it's something like this where there are real repercussions for just a single game, I think it should be here to stay, and I kind of like how it's gone so far.
Yeah, honestly, too, I think the way this play-in system has worked, I kind of want to see it in other sports, too. And I know it sounds weird, but to me, for example, imagine MLB wildcard weekend, back with the old system of how it would have looked maybe if it had this similar playing style. I don't really like the system of, hey, you play one game and if you lose, you're out. I mean, technically the system to an extent's that way. If you win once, you move on. If you lose once, of course, if you're the lowest seed, then, of course, technically you're out. But I think the big thing is that, it makes it exciting because, 4 teams, you don't know what to expect. I mean, the Wizards, for example, sitting there as an 8 seed, and they do such a good job. They have a terrible first game. And then they turn around yesterday and they have a dominant performance against Indiana. And to me, it's just impressive because this kind of system just tends to tell the tale of, hey, a story of, I may not be here this one game, but I could turn around and dominate the next game and prove that I have a caliber team to maybe compete in the NBA playoffs. And it creates pretty exciting basketball, which I think is the most important part. Thus, why I think this system is going to be really, really good to stay in the future. And honestly, I only see it getting bigger and better with maybe more revisions down the road, maybe a round robin style. You never know. But overall, I would say the play-in tournament by far a 100% success. And you have to give the NBA a ton of credit because this has really worked, in my opinion. I don't care what LeBron says much about that, but I think it's pretty awesome. But moving to my SEC, my first surprise, and I'm just going to say it simply, being a Yankees fan, in my lifetime at least of remembrance of watching the New York Yankees, ever since the David Cohn no-hitter, have never seen one in person, and I never thought in my lifetime I'd ever see one. But Corey Kluber, and gosh, I'll tell you what, I, as well as many Yankee fans, have been critical of him, not in regards to the fact that he just simply, quote-unquote, hasn't had it. Of course, he's battling back from injuries, but simply the fact that he's still not necessarily the same guy he was. But here he is, 9 no-hit innings, the first no-hitter since 99, and he's now with the Yankees forever. And he's edged in history for the Yankees forever. So to me, that's huge for the Yankees because, again, I really never expected it. This is a team that big bats, pitching, never such so, in terms of that kind of category. But for Corey Kluber, might I add, on his own bobblehead day in Texas, relatively huge for him to, give him a little push right back for giving a little jab to him. But by far a massive, massive surprise, and not to make it a double surprise, but I am a little bit surprised still how the Yankees, through these injuries, are continuing to perform relatively well. Obviously, you had to assume eventually Giancarlo Stanton was going to get hurt. I don't think you need to figure that one out in a nutshell. That typically happens. And Aaron Hicks, another one that's basically hurt on a weekly basis, and as well as Gary Sanchez here and there. So it's the Yankees. It's whatever. It stinks that it's been like that the last 5 years. But again, expectations, that one, though, was a surprise. My expectation, and it's going to carry on with injuries and stay in the baseball realm, Mike Trout. I don't know how many times I have to say this. Mike Trout's the greatest baseball player in the world, but he gets hurt all the time. It was expected at some point this year, Mike Trout's going to have a terrible injury of some sort, some way, not something that's season ending, but something that's going to put him out 4 to 6 weeks, somewhere around that span. And then when he comes back, we're going to talk about him being in the MVP race again and then say, oh, well, he didn't play enough games. To me, it's unfortunate, but it's expected at this point. Mike Trout cannot be a healthy player 162 games in a season. At least for LA, they're looking a lot better this year compared to past years. Doesn't mean they're going to make the playoffs still, but a healthy Mike Trout come October, you never know. Maybe he can finally play in his first postseason game. Of course, if he continues to stay healthy, but right now, obviously being hurt. Again, who knows? And in conclusion, I'm going to go to the NASCAR end. COTA. It's going to be interesting. I think that the iRacing race was a good start of not necessarily, what you're going to see on Sunday, but a good idea in regards to the fact that these drivers have a lot of exploring to do. And obviously, yes, they have practice, which is huge, but a couple of practices and not really many test sessions outside of the Gen 7 car isn't going to do much for you, So to me, I feel like these guys have a lot to learn, and I think you're going to see a lot of crashes, especially in a lot of the slower sections, just because it's so hard to not, lock down the brakes and, get rear wheel spin and so on, when you're going through these hard 90-degree angles and so on. But overall, COTA as a racetrack, I'm really bought into it. I think this is going to be a really huge weekend for NASCAR. Especially in viewership, but it's going to be an interesting weekend. A lot of guys are saying, hey, Chase Elliott's the favorite, obviously, because in terms of road courses, but let's not forget this too. When you go to a track, and I know the Roval's a little bit of an exception because to me, it's a road course, but it's a high-speed road course, kind of like a Road America. when you go to when you go to tracks like this is typically where road course specialists come out and really tend to shine. Not saying that they win the race, but guys like Kaz Grala, for example, Boris said, by the way, I think he's racing the Xfinity race this weekend too. And again, that he's going to win by any means. But the fact is that those guys tend to shine a lot more because this suits their styles of getting through the slow corners and trying to find momentum. So I think it's going to be an interesting weekend in that regard, that we'll see guys maybe like Michael McDowell have a top 5 performance and so on.
Yeah, I really hope now that we have more road courses that the era of road course ringers can sort of come back a little bit. When there's 7, that some of these teams in all 3 series are going to feel the need to have someone that they can put in the car and try to get some good performances. And you mentioned tracks like COTA. You can't really fake your way through this. This is a massive road course, 20 turns, 3.5 miles. It's similar in some ways. I'd say to Sonoma in that like with the hills and stuff, and to Road America to an extent as well, that you can't just be fast and survive there. I feel like Watkins Glen sometimes there's not too many like really challenging turns to get through at Watkins Glen, whereas all these heavy braking zones at COTA are going to make it really interesting. But like you said, I think we're going to see a lot of cautions as well with especially in the truck series. Last year's Daytona road course race and this year's Daytona road course race for the truck series is any indication of what we'll see, I think. And this is even more of a blind entrance because NASCAR hasn't raced at this track whatsoever. At least they're getting the practice session, though. And at least we get to see qualifying, also group qualifying. But we'll touch more on NASCAR at the very end. But I first want to talk a little more about baseball. We both hit on it a little bit. 2 things that are happening so much this year. First are the no-hitters. We already discussed this a lot the last show, but 6 no-hitters. I think we both agreed it's still good for baseball to have these no-hitters. I still think they're very exciting to watch. But that being said, when it starts happening more and more and more, the novelty will sort of wear off. And I feel like Rob Manfred they went too far the other direction. Of course, the juice baseballs I couldn't stand, that every single ball that was hit hard or hit into the air was a home run. But now it's just gotten too much. And the way the pitchers are now, we're starting to approach almost a 1968 level. Not to that extent yet, but so many of these crazy low ERAs, so many of these pitchers that are able to rack up massive amounts of strikeouts, like Corbin Burns, 58 strikeouts without a walk. Garrett Cole, 59. Jacob deGrom, we know what he can do. Like, it's continuing, and it's spreading all across the major leagues. Now, I like seeing pitchers that are dealing. I think it's exciting. But for a lot of the fans, they do want to see some sort of offense, and baseball needs to find that balance. But then for injuries, I mean, we've seen it in the NBA. We've seen it in the NFL with these short turnarounds. After weird 2020 seasons, trying to get back to normality, these athletes didn't really have the proper healing time. And also, it's important to remember that for the first 3 months of the pandemic, I know this is almost a year ago now, but all these athletes like us were all locked up. They weren't really doing anything. So, I mean, they weren't in the best shape entering last season, and it didn't really get exposed because it was only a 2-month stretch for baseball. But coming in now, the everyday, there were a lot of starts and stops last season due to COVID that aside from the first week of this season, we haven't really seen in MLB, and fingers crossed it stays like that. But so many injuries, and you mentioned Trout, of course, the Yankees and Mets, Ronald Acuna Jr., Fernando Tatis, the Dodgers are banged up. And it sort of gets frustrating, especially for the major leagues, when your best ratings teams like the Dodgers, the Padres, the Angels, the Mets, the Yankees, the teams that people want to tune in and see, they don't recognize half the names out there. And it's just frustrating that the major leagues have reached this point. And seeing how the NBA has had so many injuries that have just spanned continually through the entire season, it's a little concerning that we're only 2 months in and seeing this, because I think we have a long way to go, especially when it gets hotter in the summer. These guys start to cramp up and get more tightness and strains in leg muscles. It's a little concerning for me.
Yeah, when we talked about this a year ago, I solely expressed the concern in regards to the short season of how much more frequently players were going to get hurt. But to me, it's a little bit surprising. The players had a spring training. They had opportunities to get in shape and develop themselves furthermore. And the fact that we're seeing more and more injuries to me is a little bit concerning, because obviously you can go into science all you want to look at baseball. And I know this is not a game that's naturally played by any means, especially for pitchers. But to me, to have so many injuries just this early into the season, it has to be something in regards to maybe the spring routine. Because the other thing too is that obviously, yes, a lot changed up. There's a lot, different drills and things so on that players had to do as regard to the change. The only thing that really though was that different from this spring training from any other spring training was that there was less games, less innings played, and obviously nothing split squad related. So thus, really, players had less opportunities hitting and so on, which, again, you talked about the dead ball earlier, Eddie, at least the numbers we're seeing. To me, that does play a little bit. But again, I know we're only in May, and I'm not saying that should be an excuse 2 months in, but having those reduced at-bats and opportunities in games and so on, I think still does have a little bit of an impact on offenses overall in baseball. So I really think we will see come July a massive turnaround offensively. I'm not saying that, teams are going to hit drastically better, but we should see at least a little bit of an upside for all teams in that offensive zone. But in terms of injuries, I mean, to me, in baseball right now, and I think we talked about this in the past too with the NFL, if I'm being honest, with a bunch of injuries too, it just kind of doesn't stop. The bug doesn't simply stop, no matter what team it is, whatever. Once you start getting injuries and you get a good bunch of them, it continues. And it's unfortunate that it continues. And why? I have no clue. But, teams overall in MLB really are going to have to look into things like this and, what they can do to get players, more healthy down the road. Obviously, every player is different. Everyone has a different circumstance. And yes, injury is going to happen. But if you're the MLB in particular, as well as a team, if you're seeing your numbers go up year in, year out, you just kind of can't tolerate it anymore. It stinks. And again, I know everyone throws the shades back. Well, hey, the guys that played in the 1900s, like Cal Ripken, hey, they played over 1,000 consecutive games, and they played every inning, 162 games a year or 150 games a year back then in the old schedule. Well, baseball's not meant to be like that anymore because of scientific studies. Players aren't built like players used to be. Remember, there used to be MLB players that had day jobs before they came and played baseball. Not saying that people today aren't tough individuals, but people were built different back then. And again, I'm not saying that's relatively an excuse, but considering that fact, not the everyday human being can play baseball every day of the year. That's a simple known fact. So to expect an athlete to be there at above 100% every day of the year is a little bit tough. So I think if you play 140 games a year, that's the new regular in baseball. And I don't have a problem with that. But the massive amount of injuries we've seen that are season ending or a massive amounts of months at a time, that's a little bit concerning, because to me that feels like a failure on every organization as a whole in terms of preparation rather than just individuals. Because to me, this is just way, way too often right now. And something's going to have to be done.
And the other thing, too, is that, some of these injuries, are contact injuries or getting hit with a pitch. But for the Mets, for example, so many of these are strains or tightness. That's the case with DeGrom and Walker and Conforto and McNeil and Guillorme. So many of these are just oblique strains, hamstring tightness. And a bunch of these are injuries you never hear about in any other sport, but they just come up and they end up lingering. And we saw Jeff McNeil, for example, try to play through his, and it ended up getting worse and worse, and now he's on the injured list and could miss the foreseeable future. So that's the other tough thing as well, because these training staffs have to be able to catch these things early. We've seen now multiple Mets, first McNeil, then Alonso, who have been hurt for multiple weeks, continue to play with the injury, which then just makes it worse. makes them unproductive for the time that they're there and causes them to miss even more time when eventually they have to land on the injured list. So that's a failure on their part. That's a failure on the training staff's part of being, there's got to be more transparency here between the players and the training staff. And I'm not just saying this is a Mets issue. This is a league-wide problem. But other thing I wanted to mention that I saw on Twitter today, I'm not sure if you caught this. This was Eric Kratz was being interviewed from NJ.com, and it also came from a podcast that he was doing for Yes Network, where he was discussing how he argues that the Colorado Rockies were actually using a sign-stealing tactic that involved a massage gun being fired onto a metal bench when there was a fastball to be hit, and that it was used especially, he argues, during the NLDS game number 2 back in 2018 when the Rockies were facing the Brewers, and he was the backup catcher for the Milwaukee Brewers that postseason. And he says that there were at least 2 other teams in the majors that were doing similar tactics, but he says the Astros still did the worst thing. They went a little too far, and he says maybe it's just because people are frustrated that they won the World Series while these other 3 teams didn't get any further than the divisional series. But we know it's not just the Houston Astros that have done this. I mean, the Red Sox did it the very next year with Alex Cora. So it's just annoying to see this continue. But I mean, where are we at right now with sign stealing? Because it's really an issue of the integrity of the game. And it frustrates me because baseball did a great job weeding out the steroid users and dealing with that whole era of injustice in the major leagues. And now we've reached this entire new time, especially with new technology. We know this is going to continue to develop. You don't just need to bang a trash can. There are going to be other ways. We still don't know what was under Jose Altuve's shirt there at the ALCS back in 2019. Like, it's concerning, but do you think that there's something that the major leagues have to do further to try to address the sign stealing issue?
Well, to me, in that regards to the Brewers Rockies situation when Kratz played there, there's a little bit in depth and boundaries, in my opinion, at least, compared to the Astros in which way you go. If you get a massage gun and you have it bouncing off the bench, if they're picking up something in the dugout and say, hey, this sign, we know this is coming and something's being tipped and so on, I actually don't genuinely have a problem with that. But to me, when it gets too far is when you utilize technology. For example, Alex Cora, great example, with the watches and so on. And it wasn't the first time prior to that, with the Red Sox being caught with technology being involved in terms of cheating and getting, signs and scandals and so on, even before the Alex Cora era. We look at least for the Houston Astros, to utilize a television and a camera, and then thus you bang off the trash can. Listen, I would have a problem if they were hitting a trash can to tell what pitch was going, if it didn't come from them watching a TV screen to steal signs. I think there's a fine difference of having something going on the field or know a pitcher is tipping something to have a dead giveaway. To me, that's not as much of a problem. That's the natural way of playing the game, in my opinion. But once you start bringing technology and other things to try to get an upper edge, that's when all I would say fairness is out the window. That's to me where I have a problem with it. Again, I can't say much because obviously we don't have much detail in regards to what Eric Kratz is talking about. Now, if technology is involved, then I think that should be a problem. I think that something should be done about it if it is true. But the fact of the matter is this: if you're going to go to the extent of the Astros cheating, and again, the Astros, but with the banging the trash can, that's bad. I don't know if you've seen the video of Carlos Correa had a chip at the end of the bat. That's bad too. I'm sorry, and I don't think they got penalized for that. But I mean, there was a zoomed in video that had clear as day evidence that he had to fall off the bat. It was taped to the bottom of the bat, and it fell off. He acted like a little piece of the bat broke off, and he tried to get in his pocket. So to me, that's sad. That's upsetting. But the fact of the matter is this: again, that's above and beyond. That's a little bit extreme. You get technology involved. So for baseball right now, something has to be done for those instances. But for the fair instances, in my opinion, to me, again, sign stealing's always going to happen. Every team is going to do whatever they can to get an upper edge, but it's about how you do it. If you do it fairly, you're doing it on the field or doing it via visualization, just how you are, as if you're a hitter at the plate trying to time up the pitch, or if you're a pitcher on the mound trying to get a hitter off balance. It works the same way. All visualization and what you see and you analyze, not from what you're seeing to get an advantage from something else that someone else doesn't have. That's when that goes too far.
Yeah, I can agree with you on that. Like, in some instances, I mean, if the pitcher and catcher are just being very explicit, if they're a new battery pairing and it's very clear, I mean, you've got to take advantage of that opportunity as a hitter because you're only going to get so many hits. And if you have an opportunity like this, especially in a close game, but if you're going to do it like using technology, if you're going to start banging trash cans and stuff like that, baseball needs to crack down on stuff like that. It's just ruins the integrity of the game. But let's shift gears to the NBA. We're going to do our picks for each of the upcoming series. But first off, takeaways for you from the play-in tournament. We've already discussed how we both really enjoyed the play-in tournament, but LeBron with that big shot over Steph Curry, Curry getting some bad flashbacks to 5 years ago when Kyrie hit that big shot over him for the Cavaliers to win that championship back in 2016. A couple of blowouts on the Eastern Conference side, but what are some takeaways you've got from the play-in tournament?
Yeah, I think in terms of takeaways, I think that you kind of have an idea in regards to how these teams are already going to do going into the playoffs. And what I mean by that, for example, is the Wizards played a great game against Indiana yesterday, but when you're lined up right there, facing the 1 seed going in, I just don't know when you're inconsistent about, how well that's going to go. Who else was? I think it was Boston that played the first day, right? And they ended up going out victorious. That team was, again, another team that played really, really well and had a very good performance against the Wizards. But the fact of the matter is, too, there was a little bit of inconsistencies to open up that second half that I'm a little bit worried about. Again, the play-in tournament overall, you saw some big moments. You saw some guys really, really shine in those big moments that matter. But then we also have to remember, too, technically the play-in tournament's a tournament, but it's not technically the playoffs. That's the other thing. So now that we're coming into the playoffs, I don't know how these 7 and 8 seeds are going to fare. It's going to be interesting, needless to say. But overall, I don't see many of these teams lasting long at all.
Yeah, neither do I. I mean, there's a reason why these teams are seeded 7th or worse. Only one is the Lakers. You never know there. But let's do our predictions.
Oh, so the Lakers are the 8, correct?
Lakers are the 7th.
7, sorry.
It's kind of confusing with how they do the seeding. I don't really know. I don't really agree necessarily with how they do the matchups, but I still like having the play-in tournament anyway. But let's make our predictions here. Let's start on the Eastern Conference side of things where everything is settled. Let's start with the 76ers and the Wizards. Joel Embiid, MVP level season. Bradley Beal's been solid. Russell Westbrook setting records, now the all-time triple-doubles leader in NBA history. But I got the Sixers taking control. This Philadelphia team is dominating. I don't see anyone in that Washington front court finding a way to stop Joel Embiid. Ben Simmons, I think, is going to be able to match up very well with Russell Westbrook and control him, especially as a good post player who can take a charge, whereas Indiana, for example, really couldn't do anything with him because they didn't really have anybody, a guard that could match up with Russell Westbrook that also had a lot of size. So I think the Sixers – Wizards will get 1, maybe even game 1, but I think the Sixers take this series in 5 games. How about you?
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree. I think that this Sixers team is dominant. Embiid's playing MVP caliber basketball, and this team overall, before going into the season, let's be honest, we didn't think this team had the it factor or was going to be a 1 seed, especially after last year where they got a bit complacent. Obviously, having a new coach is huge, but you got a little bit complacent. And you didn't just feel like this team was going to be good enough to compete for a championship. But this year, it's been a total total different factor of development. You've seen him be played good. You've seen the offense, especially, come up big in big moments. And to me, that's the thing that matters most. And obviously, I mentioned Washington's inconsistencies as well. Russell Westbrook played really great against Indiana. He did not play really great against Boston. He did not score well. In fact, he really struggled shooting early on. And that, to me, is going to be a little bit concerning for Washington moving forward. They need to shoot productively. Even if they're not making shots, they need to take productive shots, which I felt throughout the entire playing tournament, even when they dominated Indiana yesterday. They did not shoot productively well. So I think that's going to be a team that, again, out early. Maybe at best 5 games, but the Sixers, they're going to have that all locked and settled. That team is good and ready to go.
All right, so now scary hours. The Nets, it's going to be the first time in the entire season that they have Kyrie, Harden, Durant, Griffin, and Joe Harris all on the floor at the same time. They did have the big three together for the last 2 games of the regular season, and they played really well, shared the ball well, but they've only played a combined 204 minutes together as a group. That being said, they're facing a Celtics team that is very banged up. Kemba Walker has been on and off the bench with injuries. Jaylen Brown out. The Celtics are depleted. I'm going to go, obviously, I think the Nets are going to win. I think they've got a good chance to run the table here in the Eastern Conference, but I do think the Celtics will, they'll take one. I think the Nets are going to kind of get a shell shock, maybe even in game 1 or 2, just like Philly. The Boston's going to come out ready to play. The Nets can get a little sloppy, get a little crazy, and lose a close game, but I've got Brooklyn in 5.
Yeah, I have well in 5. I think they're going to lose game 3 to be exact. But overall, again, we can't underrate this Nets team. The offense is remarkable. Harden, Kyrie, these guys can really, maybe not so much Harden in the past, but this year at least we've seen they've made big shots when it matters. Obviously, KD, seeing him back in the playoffs for the first time since his injury, that is also massive. Blake Griffin, all he's been chasing is an NBA championship. You think all those, oh, so close, what if, that we could have done back in LA. I think for him, this is a huge opportunity as well to play some really big basketball. But, again, overall, this Nets offense is going to be good. My one concern, how do you play down? We've talked about this all year long, Eddie. How do you play down to the weaker teams? Does your defense show up, or is it just become a scoring fest and it's whoever can outscore each other? If the Nets can play solid defense, this team will go to the NBA championship. I can almost guarantee it. They have the entire team filled with talent like none other. But I also say this, and again, it's thinking about this in an interesting level, and I'm not trying to jump too far into the future, but you have to really start to think for the Nets this year, it's championship or bust legitimately. Because if you ever look deeper into the future, at least from what I've read, Harden, Kyrie, as well as KD, all have opt-outs at the end of this year. So that era, if they don't win a championship this year, could be in trouble.
Yeah, and then Durant and Irving are both absolute free agents after next season. So it's really, I don't see any of them really opting out or leaving. Maybe they opt out and try to get a better deal. But I think it's a 2-year window here for Brooklyn. You've got to take advantage of this opportunity. Honestly, I think the Celtics are too good of a team for the Nets to play down to. They played down to Cleveland and Detroit, the worst teams in the NBA. Boston, at least, is middle of the road here. So, also Blake Griffin has played really good defense. Claxton, Bruce Brown. They do have some support, a solid supporting cast from the defensive side, but the big three can't just focus on scoring. You need Durant, you need Harden to also make some stops on the defensive side. Against the Celtics team that can move and has some shooters like Peyton Pritchard that can maybe make something happen. And, of course, facing Jason Tatum, who had 50 points in the play-in tournament, that's going to be a challenge. But maybe the most interesting first-round series, the Bucks and the Heat rematch. Remember the Heat upset the Bucks, then knocked off Boston and made it to the NBA Finals and actually forced it to a 6th game against the Lakers. I think this series goes 7. I like Miami. I think they have a lot of postseason experience from last season in the bubble with Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero's playing well, Duncan Robinson. It's almost the exact same roster coming back from last season. Milwaukee has gotten better, though. They've gotten Drew Holiday, for example. But I think Milwaukee does pull it out in 7. I think it's going to be close. A lot of close games. I think Antetokounmpo is finally going to have that big clutch postseason shot at some point in this series. But I've got Milwaukee in 7.
I have Milwaukee, but I have them winning in 6. I think Miami can take 2 games, but let's not underrate Giannis's team. I'll tell you what, Giannis comes out to play big when it matters. And, depth-wise, at least, I feel this Milwaukee team's a little bit stronger compared to where Miami was. Now, obviously, yes, Miami had a massive miracle last year, but sometimes it takes a little bit of learning and a little bit of struggles and troubles throughout a season to really develop a good basketball team. If I'm being honest, and when I'm looking at at Milwaukee, obviously, yes, their seeding is relatively high and they currently sit in that 3 seed. But the fact of the matter is, when you look at the Eastern Conference, they're probably, without a doubt, a top 3 favorite. Now, again, not based upon the seeding, but at least to win that Eastern Conference championship. If they can get through Miami, which I feel could be their toughest task, if you get through this team, you have a good chance of going very, very far in this playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. Final Eastern Conference matchup. Basketball, postseason basketball at the Mecca, the Knicks and the Hawks. The Knicks have been playing really well. The Hawks fired their coach earlier in the season. They were well below 500, and then with Nate McMillan and such, and now all of a sudden, things are going really well in Atlanta, and Trae Young playing well. They've got the 5 seed, and they're facing off with the New York Knicks. I think this is going to be a tight series as well. But I do think the New York Knicks will move on as the better seed. I think it's going to go 6 games, but I think Julius Randle is going to have a big postseason performance. I don't see the Knicks going beyond this because I don't really think they match up with Philly, Brooklyn, Milwaukee, or Miami, but I think they can definitely get through the first round.
I'm going to have to agree the Knicks win, but I'm going to have to game total. Let me tell you something. The Atlanta played with fire. I don't know if you saw about this, but Nate McMillan got a massive, massive fine as a result of his interview the other day where he said the NBA wanted the New York Knicks to be a playoff team, and that's the reason why this team's so successful. And let me tell you something, that's going to piss off the Knicks ever so much more. I think this team has the capability of showing that they can play good basketball. I'm not saying that they're going to win an NBA title, but if you want to squash one franchise that has been a disappointment since day one, and let's be honest, ever since they were a 1 seed and did not even play to its standards back in the playoffs, I think the Knicks sweep 4-0 over the Atlanta Hawks. And I'm not a Knicks fan for the record, but I know when you play with fire with New York, those fans are going to be angry, and so will be the players.
I don't see any way the Hawks really steal a game in New York at Madison Square Garden with, I believe 13,000 people. It's the biggest gathering in New York City so far since the pandemic. I mean, it's going to be loud at the Garden, so should be a good series. Now let's shift to the West. Now, we don't know yet if it's going to be Golden State or Memphis, but regardless, they're going to go up against the Utah Jazz. Donovan Mitchell says he's healthy. He's missed the last month of the season, but the Jazz have been dominant. They somehow have 2 players as finalists for 6th Man of the Year. That's how solid that bench has been. Even if it's Golden State, I think they'd fare a little better than Memphis. I think Curry could have a standout performance, maybe go for 50 in a playoff game. But I've got Utah cruising through, I think, in 5 games, regardless of who they face.
I agree. I can see Jazz winning in 5 games, but the big thing for the Jazz, and again, I've said this, and I'm a big Jazz supporter for the record, but I've said this from the start. I still cannot understand what this team has done outside of develop and get better that they've actually done to be the best team going into the playoffs record-wise in the NBA. I mean, they only brought back Derek Favors via free agency after losing him for a couple of years. This team didn't make any big moves. They still have Bogdanovich, who, of course, they lost from the pandemic last year when they went into the bubble. Of course, Mike Conley played great basketball. And by the way, he had his fair share of injury woes as well. Of course, they traded for Clarkson last year. That's worked out very well. Joe Ingles had a career year this year, at least in terms of shooting percentage and so on. But I also can't ignore the fact that he is inconsistent at times when it matters. And of course, Rudy Gobert, I mean, no matter what you say, arguably the greatest defensive forward the NBA has right now. I mean, every year he's up there for Defensive Player of the Year. So to me, it makes or at least it makes sense why the Jazz are a team competing for a Western Conference championship. But it still doesn't add up to me, at least a reason why they're the 1 seed, even when you lose arguably your best player of Donovan Mitchell on the offensive end of the ball. But Donovan coming back, we know how he plays in the playoffs. He's a dominant force. And might I add, more than half of his career double-doubles have all come in the postseason. Think about that for a moment. He comes to play when it matters. And I think that's going to be a big factor when you have him healthy to open up the playoffs. And again, no matter who it's against, if it's against, the Warriors, we know how those games tend to be scoring fests between both of those teams. If it's against Memphis actually, if I'm not mistaken, had an upper edge on them in the season record this year. Not saying the Jazz were playing down against opponents like the Nets were, but it seemed like Memphis was a little bit competitive. But needless to say, I think the Jazz can get through the first series. I just don't know once we get later into the playoffs, and we'll talk about that later, I'm sure. But I just don't know if this team has the it factor to make themselves NBA championship potentially at.
Yeah, I don't really know how far they're actually going to go, but I think they can definitely pull out this series pretty easily. But now an interesting one. Phoenix Suns, Los Angeles Lakers 2v7. Suns have been great. Monty Williams, what a job. Starting in the bubble last season when they went 8-0, nearly got into the postseason after coming in with like a 10% chance to even make the playoffs. And then this year they bring in Chris Paul as a veteran. You've got Devin Booker there playing like the star that he is. And you've got a nice supporting cast there. But the Lakers, I mean, you still have LeBron James. You still have Anthony Davis. They both look pretty healthy right now out there on the floor. I know it's a small sample size, that game against Golden State. This sort of reminds me in a way of, I forgot what year it was. It was the last year LeBron was in Cleveland. When they were a lower seed, they had to face the Pacers, and it was a really close first-round series. I think this is going 7 games, but I have the Lakers as the 7th seed taking down the Phoenix Suns.
Oh, that's a bold prediction. And I'll tell you what, I mean, again, this was a team might I add in our preseason prediction, I'm pretty sure. And obviously I wasn't on the show when we did this. But, of course, I have the Lakers going back to the championship this year. But what I've seen recently, I just don't know if I can have them beating the Suns. The one thing the Suns have done so good this year, outside of shooting a lot better, and by the way, one thing might I add before I add that point, whatever happened to the Chris Paul that's a cocky, selfish player? All of a sudden now everyone loves Chris Paul. The whole persona has changed. Maybe the fact of the matter is James Harden was really the problem in Houston, but that's another story. Needless to say, for the Suns, it's been incredible what they've been able to do. From the worst team in the NBA for years, what they were able to do in the bubble last year, remarkable. And they've carried that momentum. Obviously, we know how lights out Devin Booker is, arguably one of the best spot-up shooters in the NBA, outside of Steph Curry, of course. And the fact of the matter is, when he can shoot such a high percentage, he's a game-day disaster to stop. Chris Paul can dish assists to the best of them, and that offense is so strong that I think he can outdo the Lakers. The thing is, again, what can you do with your speed advantage and your athleticism to really compete with the size the Lakers have? Because you can't ignore that. We know how lights out AD was as well last year in the playoffs. Obviously, there's no question LeBron's going to have a triple-double every game this year. But the fact of the matter is, if you can compete with that size, I think the Suns have a good chance. I agree with you. This series goes 7, but I have the Suns beating them in this first round.
I'm going to agree with you on the Chris Paul point, though, because think about these last 2 years. The Thunder, after trading away everybody with Chris Paul and a bunch of nobodies, still got a 5 seed in the playoffs, and now Phoenix jumps from the barely right on the fringe of being a playoff team to the number 2 seed in the Western Conference. I mean, Chris Paul definitely, and it's not just his play on the court. He's 36 years old, but those intangibles, providing leadership. Each of the last 2 years, he's been playing with a lot of young guys, which we did not see with the Rockets or the Clippers, teams that were stacked with veterans. And he didn't find as much success there, especially in Houston over those last couple of years. So I think he's really being able to excel, but I still find it very hard to honestly pick against LeBron James in the playoffs. As much as I can't stand the Lakers, it's a difficult choice for me. Now, next one, I'm going to go here with Clippers, Mavs. I've got the Clippers rolling. I've got the Clippers sweeping the Dallas Mavericks. I think the Clippers are going to come back angry after what happened last season. Of course, now they have a new coach entering the playoffs. Now, the coach wasn't really the issue there. We see Doc Rivers doing just fine in Philadelphia. It was that Paul George and Kawhi Leonard forgot how to play the last 3 games. But regardless, I think they're going to play really well here. The Dallas Mavericks have been very up and down this season. They've had games they've played well. They've had games where they've been down by 50 points. Kristaps Porzingis has not been all that they had hoped for, that they had been advertised by the Knicks. Luka Doncic honestly did not have as solid of a season as people thought. Everybody was automatically thinking, oh, he's going to be an MVP consideration right there with Giannis Antetokounmpo and LeBron and Anthony Davis. It really hasn't proven to be that whatsoever. So I think the Clippers are going to do very well in this series. I think they cruise through in 4 games.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with you. You know, to me, for Dallas, there's nothing really that jumps out wow at me other than the fact that, hey, they won a bunch of close games this year that really played in their favor. Now, sure, like I guess like Miami last year, you'd say, oh, well, they're playing the underdog role a little bit. And, you know, if you play good, consistent basketball, you can find ways to be successful. But I just don't know if you can do that against the Clippers. I mean, this team, especially with its experience after last year, knows how much it wants to win. And for example, I'll compare it to the Knicks situation. Obviously, 2 different scenarios. But when you have a team that's poised and angry, especially come the playoffs, you know they're going to be energetic and lights out. And with that being said, I'm not saying, again, the Clippers are going to go win a championship, but at least to open up the playoffs, this team is going to face teams, again, that are average and make them look like they're the Detroit Pistons, needless to say. So I think the Clippers are going to dominate the series. In fact, I'm going to make this bold of a prediction. I don't think you see a single game within 10 points. I think it's all double digits, and the Clippers completely dominate from the get-go. I think Dallas is in a little bit of trouble, and really, I think Mark Cuban needs a whole new direction for that team, because while Doncic is great, Kristaps Porzingis was not the answer, and that team needs a lot more depth. Glad to see they made the playoffs, but sayonara and try again next year.
All right, last one, Portland and Denver. Nikola Jokic, probably the favorite to win the MVP, but Denver is without Jamal Murray, who was their postseason hero last year after that ACL injury a couple of months ago. They've also been without Gary Harris. I mean, they've been dealing with a lot of injuries. They did bring in Aaron Gordon at the trade deadline. As for Portland, up and down season, they were just narrowly able to squeak out the 6th seed and avoid having to face off in the play-in tournament with Golden State. But they have, who I'd argue is, aside from LeBron James and Steph Curry, the best postseason player in the NBA in Damian Lillard. Thinking about some of those famous shots 2 years ago against OKC, 8 years ago against Houston. And despite being the 6th seed, and despite the talent Nikola Jokic brings, and I think Jokic is going to have a great series, I think we get 2 upsets in the Western Conference first round. I've got the Blazers in 6 over Denver. I think that series is going to be very competitive. I think Lillard's going to have some clutch shots. McCollum as well. It's going to be a good series for Jokic. I'm not saying Jokic disappears, but I don't know how much really he has around him to succeed, and being without Jamal Murray really hurts Denver. I've got Portland taking that series.
You know, typically we don't agree on almost everything, and outside of one series, we've agreed pretty much. And I'm going to have to agree. I think Damian Lillard comes up clutch like he always does in the playoffs and carries Portland to a first-round victory, and I have the same as you in 6 games. I think the Trailblazers, again, maybe underachieved just a tiny bit this year. I felt like this team really did early on have the potential to be competing up there for 1 seed. but unfortunately just didn't work out to be. I think that this team too is healthy. That's the big thing. We talked about past years, Eddie, where this team going towards the playoffs, was a little bit of an if factor because they weren't healthy. You didn't know what Damian Lillard was going to be. You didn't know what CJ McCollum, for example, was going to be. But this year, you have a healthy Blazers team for the most part. And with that being said, you would have to imagine this team is going to be energetic. They're going to find ways to play good, productive basketball. And as long as that's the fact of the matter, I think you see the Blazers be good. Not having Murray is a big, big blow, obviously, for Denver. With him being out for the year, it puts a lot of pressure on your MVP forward. But the fact of the matter is that we can't underrate this team either. And again, I'm not saying that, we're underrating them because they get eliminated in this round. It's the fact of the matter, again, you're playing against a team that's right around your level, a very good Trailblazers team, but injuries do have a massive impact when you lose a superstar like Murray. And there's going to be a lot of pressure on Jokic to have some success. And not saying that he's not going to succeed, but obviously the game plan is going to be directed around him. If they can find some offensive shooting, that's great. But in terms of defensive play, I mean, you can shut down this Trailblazers team all you want. But if you can't find that offensive production, and it's crazy to think about that we're talking about this with Denver, because last year in the postseason, they were obviously electric on offense. But when you can't focus a mix of inside game and shooting from deep, you're not going to be successful against this Trailblazers team. I think that's going to be the fact of the matter for this first round.
All right, so we'll see what happens. NBA playoffs, the actual postseason starts on Saturday. Last couple of minutes here. COTA, we already touched on it a little bit. Going to be different, going to be exciting. Tim, what are you looking for, and who's your pick to win the Cup race on Sunday?
Well, I'll start with the pick. And, I said earlier, obviously, you want to expect a road course ringer to come out. But, again, I still have to say the man is due. I give Chase Elliott a living, dying chance to go out there and win at COTA. I mean, he needs a win at this point, Eddie. It needs to happen. Every driver in Hendrick has a victory. They have 5 wins this year. And, oh, by the way, how special would it be for Rick Hendrick to tie the all-time team owners win record with Richard Petty Motorsports, and of course Richard Petty, the king himself, this weekend with a win via NASCAR's favorite driver of Chase Elliott. I think the timing is right. He's long due for a win, and that would be huge. But in terms of this weekend, it's really interesting, Eddie, because when we go to road courses, it's so different in regards to what we're seeing this weekend from other tracks. Earlier on in the show, you talked about Watkins Glen, how it's high speed, so many fast bank corners. When you used to go, what used to be Infineon or Sonoma, even adding the carousel outside of the final corner of turn 11, or what's maybe now, I guess, turn 12 because of the carousel, you don't really have many slow cores. Obviously, you go down the hill, but that's at high speeds. The Cup Series only used to go to those 2 tracks. The Roval, same thing, with the exception of the 2 corners in the infield. Everything, again, is high speed going throughout the most part. Daytona Road Course, same exact scenario. To me, COTA is a little bit kind of like Mid-Ohio. Yeah, you have your long straights, but you also have your good little portions of tiny corners where you have to really get down and continue to roll your speed and momentum. And I think that's the fact of the matter. Obviously, COTA is a lot bigger than Mid-Ohio as well and has a lot more straightaways, but you have to find a good balance, which is the reason why, again, I mentioned road course ringers are going to excel because they have that balance. Not saying that those balance aren't apparent in other tracks, but here it's more apparent than others. So I think you're going to see a lot of spins, especially rear wheel lockup spins, or guys, especially in those fast portions, go get a little bit sideways. But my bold prediction, top 5, I have Chase Elliott going first, Michael McDowell second. I know that sounds insane, but I have McDowell in second. I have Denny Hamlin finishing third, Kaz Grala fourth, and I'm going to say, this is a little bit tough. I'm going to say Kyle Busch comes home fifth. That's just again a bold prediction, but I think Chase Elliott gets it done.
All right, well, I'll do a top five too. I think it's going to be a great race. I think it's going to be there's going to be some spins and wrecks, just like the Daytona road course. I don't think it's going to be as crazy as the truck race or the Xfinity race, which could be wild because a lot of these guys have little to no road course experience whatsoever, especially in trucks. And we saw how the truck field couldn't even handle Darlington. So I don't really know what's going to happen here. But top five, I got to agree with you. We've been agreeing a lot today, Tim, but Chase Elliott, he is due. The only Hendrick driver without a win this season, and he's the defending champion. And as we get more and more and more winners, he gets into a bit of an uncomfortable position. Already all these winners, plus Denny Hamlin firmly in control of the points lead. That's another spot away for people like Chase Elliott and Kevin Harvick. I mean, come on, you got to get a win. You got to get into the field. You got to clinch your spot. I think he gets it done. He takes advantage of the fact that there's road courses on the schedule. I didn't have the best luck at Daytona road course, spun out really late in that one, but I think he's going to win at COTA. But I'm going to put him first. Second, I'm going to say Martin Truex Jr., only because he's really good at these road courses, and he's been really fast all season long. He's been probably the most consistently fast driver, aside from Denny Hamlin, this season. Third place, I'm going to say Michael McDowell. I think Michael McDowell has another good run. He's due again. He did really well at the Daytona road course. Fourth place, this might be a little out of the box, but I'm going to go with Kurt Busch in the one car. He has had a lot of misfortune, but he is a sneaky good road course driver. We also saw him be very aggressive in the Daytona road course race. Unfortunately, lost control and spun out at one point from the lead, but I think that Ganassi Chevrolet could be fast. And fifth place, this is a tough consideration as well. I'm going to go with Brad Keselowski. I know Keselowski's had some tough runs at these road courses, but in the past, he's had some good road course runs. Thinking about 2012, 2013, when he was one of the favorites back every year at Watkins Glen, when it would come down to him, Marcus Ambrose, and Kyle Busch, he'd always be in the picture. He also has some good runs at Sonoma. I think Keselowski is going to restore himself and get back to that road course prowess. But we'll have time to break that down and preview everything that's happening Memorial Day weekend next week on Sports Speak. We appreciate everybody tuning in once again. You can follow us on Twitter at Sports Speak Live. But that'll wrap up today's episode. For everybody who tuned in, I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
Signing off here on Sports Speak. Have a great rest of your weekend.